Hello there and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing parlor, where at least today I'm going to be doing a little bit of stitching. Yes, I put down the power drill and the paintbrush for once so that I can actually get back to something a little bit more in my usual wheelhouse, which in this case would be beading a bug. But you can't say that these aren't basically Christmas ornaments that normally I put a pin back onto already. All they need is a loop or a hook on the back or something to be able to fix them onto the tree. Honestly, I could probably just set them onto the tree and that would work, although if they fell down then a cat could get to them. So they need some sort of securing to the tree. And while I would love to cover my Christmas tree in beaded bugs, no surprise there, it does take quite a while to put one of these together, anywhere from 6 to 12 hours. So I decided instead of trying to make a full set of these, which would take quite a lot of time, I would go ahead and just make one new ornament each year. And I'm very excited just to have some cozy, calm crafting time, so please join me over at the sequinning station.
And while I'm a big fan of a beaded beetle, I decided that since I had pulled together quite a few spiderweb inspired ornaments over on my tree, that it would be best to put together a giant spider for this first ornament of the eventual set. So I have a piece of felt here and I'm just drawing the base shape for my spider here, which is just a large teardrop. I probably could have made this actually a little bit wider because this turned out a little on the slim side. And honestly, this shape reminds me quite a lot of a bulb from a set of Christmas lights anyhow, so really it is quite apropos for the task at hand. And I was just sketching onto the felt with a Sharpie here. I'll cut my piece of felt down a little bit, although this is going to be a larger spider today, larger than I would usually make for a brooch, and that's me talking. Normally I like a good, 5 or 6 inch large brooch, but this is going to be a very large spider today, because of course I want to make these things large enough that they will stand out on the tree. And I'll just cut some of the spare felt down into similar shaped sections that I can layer together just to pad up this shape and make it a little bit more 3D. And I will just use some Gutermann all-purpose thread on a beading needle to tack these down into place. I'm just going to whip these into place along the felt here, quite loosely honestly, just so that they remain puffy. We don't want anything too tight at this point, since I'm actually trying to add volume here as opposed to constrict it, I suppose. And you can also see my very favorite tool over here at the sequinning station, which is this tiny little silver-plated spoon that I use to pick up and put away the beads. But once I have my initial shape sketched out and padded up a little bit, I'm just going to start by filling in the entire head of my spider today with some size 8 sequins. These are cupped transparent red sequins. I'm going to sew those with the cup facing down, so like the dome rising up off the edge of the felt. I'm just going to grab one of those and then a tiny metallic red sequin and then a tiny size 15 seed bead that will serve as a sort of rivet to hold these sequins down in place against the surface of the felt. Basically, you just string through your sequins and then string on a bead last, then thread the needle back through just the sequins so that the bead stays on the surface and holds them in place. If you have ever seen me make one of my beaded buddies before, or even doing other embellishments, I've probably used this same technique. This was the first sequin embellishing technique I ever learned because my grandma taught me how to do this while she was sewing some sequins onto a blouse or something before we went to a family Christmas party one year. Or at least that's the memory that I have floating vaguely in the back of my mind somewhere. But I really can't remember well anything that happened before like 2 days ago, really for the most part. But I'll use this same technique and same set of sequins to fill in the entire head of my spider here. It sort of, is a nod to the idea that spiders have multiple eyes to fill the entire head zone in with all these little round bits. Though, of course, I'm never really paying much attention to keeping anatomically correct while doing any of the embellishments, or making any but the very first one of these I ever tried to make. I did try and make a replica of an emperor moth for the first one of these bugs I ever put together. I think that was one of the first. It might be the second bug I ever did, because the very first I ever made was the black beaded cicada that I made for the cicada gown years and years ago at this point. But that is the brooch I still reach for the most, because it's a giant cicada, all in black. So of course in my wardrobe, that just happens to coordinate with anything. But I'm just going in a circle here, and then I will just spiral my way inside, layering these on top of one another just a little bit, which again helps build up the texture, filling in all the blank space on the felt with sparkly stuff. It's one of the nice things about making Christmas decorations is you don't have to worry about being too glittery. There literally is no such thing. But I did have a last few little gaps here at the top of my spider's head, so I just filled those in with some of these smaller sequins that I had been using layered, all by themselves, just to fill in any little extra gaps. I like to really pack in the sparkle when making things like this. Although it's important to mix up your materials, so I'm using a transparent glossy sequin here, a metallic sequin, and then a glass bead. And actually the tiny size 15 beads I was using on this portion are actually Charlotte cut beads as well, so they have a little facet sliced out of them, so they're extra sparkly even though they are absolutely minuscule and barely went over the edge of my needle. But for filling in the main body of my spider today, as you can see, I've laid out many different red options from my stash of beads and sequins. As always, I will recommend Cartwright's Sequins. It is my favorite source for sequins, although you can also find some very unique shapes and colors and finishes of sequin over on Etsy as well. But I will link to Cartwright's below. Not sponsored, I just really like their products and they've always had very fast service in my experience, so I find them quite reliable. And I can link to a couple of the Etsy stores where I like to pick up seed beads and other beads as well. But I'm just starting out with these large rectangle glass beads here, and I normally wouldn't use anything this large on a beaded bug, but because this arachnid today is on the larger side, I felt I could get away with stepping up the size of the beads I'm using. This would make it a little bit heavy as well to be a brooch, but not necessarily for a Christmas decoration. But I'll just stagger a few of these, and then I like to fill this sort of thing in rows, and I think that gives a kind of Klimt-ish look, almost mosaic or pointillist effect in the end. And I'll be using that same kind of technique today, just on a slightly larger scale because the spider again is on the larger side. So I'm filling in the rows that I've started with these large rectangle beads, just staying in line with those rectangles. And I'm using 2 shades of check glass fire polish beads here. I'm using size 6s, size 4s, and size 3 for this project today. And primarily I had these laying out so that I could use them to make the legs for the spider later, but I did end up using these larger beads in the center of my spider friend here as well. I think this is the cyan color and then the darker variant of that, which is a very, very deep red that almost looks black unless you hold it up to the light. And I will just string these on and then go back with my thread and couch that strand down. So I'm just coming up next to the strand or like right underneath the strand in between each bead and taking a stitch over the strand. It's just what they call this technique of securing a strand down, usually with beads like this, but you could of course string on something else. And it is sometimes used with gold working threads or metal threads as well. And unsurprisingly, I do find embroidery a little hard to explain. It's easier to just do it and hope you can kind of see what I'm doing, even though of course the camera can never quite capture what's going on. And I'm keeping the size 6 beads concentrated near where these larger beads were, and then fanning towards smaller beads and then going from a brighter red to a darker red as I reach the edges of my spider friend body here. What is it abdomen of the spider? I don't know arachnid anatomy. Honestly, I don't want to have to study it unless you can promise me it's all cartoon pictures as opposed to close-ups of real spiders. Again, my fascination with the natural world only goes so far. I quite like learning about science actually, but just don't make me look at creepy things like in the flesh, as it were. And this is all just trial and error. I'm stringing things on, seeing if I like it, seeing if things fit where I want, deciding on a strand, and then again just coming up and couching everything back down once I have decided what is going to go where. And I'll use smaller beads. I've got some bugle beads, some different colors of size 11 seed beads, and different sequins even that I can string on and use like beads. And the nice thing about stringing on sequins is, while you can use that to introduce a different texture primarily, but also different colors and effects, sequins are also made of plastic, which means they are lighter than the glass beads. And of course, if you make something entirely out of glass beads, the weight of the finished object will reflect that, so it will be a little on the heavy side. I also have some square tila beads here, square and rectangular, so full tila and half tila beads here that I'm using. These are a specific kind of Japanese bead from Mayuki company, I believe, who make excellent seed beads all around. But I wanted to include some tilas in this. I like the tiling sort of micro mosaic effect you can get by using tila beads. And I did use those flat, so like square, and then standing up on their edge. Again, just to vary the texture of this and introduce as much sparkle as possible. I will also grab some gold work thread here, This is bullion thread. It's actually just a tiny, tiny spiral of wire. You see this often in gold work. However, this thread does come in every color, and I do have some red laying around. So I've just cut a strand of that into little tubes that I can sew on like beads. And this stuff is really good at fitting into very tight spaces. If you don't have size 15 seed beads laying around like I do, which are absolutely minuscule, again, barely fit over the end of the needle, although there are different sizes of beading needles. So if you run into that problem a lot, maybe just go for a narrower needle. But because bullion thread is just made up of very, very thin wire, you can kind of squish it down into little tight spaces if you need to fill it in with a little bit of sparkle. This thread here I think is considered a check pearl, so it does have almost a faceted quality to it as well. So again, adding in more sparkle even to the very crevasses of this nonsense. And after I have a few lengths of beads stitched on, I can kind of just fill in between and really pack as many beads and sequins and thread and nonsense in here as I can in the little tiny space I've given myself. And I wanted to show you this other spider up close so you can see how I normally do this on my smaller pieces, because today I'm using some larger beads that I wouldn't normally. But here you can see how I use these flat Tila beads in an almost mosaic tile fashion, using seed beads and other bits to weave these little squares together into an almost mesh. And these blue Tilas, as well as the dark red ones I'm using on today's project, have what's called Picasso finish on them, and it's just where they have this almost verdigris effect, a little bit of a glaze thrown onto the bead. I always fall prey to the beads that have an extra patina going on. But because Tila have such a uniform size, you can really interlock them. So even on this little tiny row of half Tilas here that you can barely see, I will string in another half Tila on this second strand that kind of interlocks almost like a Lego in with the first strand of beads. So they're interlocked and kind of spaced. Hopefully you can see again what I mean by that. Probably not. Again, this is trying to explain something that I'm in a flow state, you know? I'm not really thinking about what beads go where in a very specific way. I'm just trialing it as I go, doing what I like securing down what I like and removing what I don't. It is almost like painting in a sense, just with beads and sequins instead of with actual pigments. But once I have my spider mostly filled in here, I am going to again fill in the last few gaps and embellish this a little bit extra with these square sequins. I do believe these are a size 8 square sequin, but don't quote me on it. I'm going to take these and then fold them in half and kind of pinch them in my fingers so that they're more of a diamond shape, like a little red metallic diamond taco. I'm going to string those onto my needle, use a bead again to hold this into place, string back through the sequin, and then I'll just use these little metallic sort of thorny tacos to add even more sparkle and catch even more light with this spider. I'm just taking a little bit more of that bullion thread and again shoving it in anywhere there might be a little bit of felt showing, anywhere there is a gap remaining in this very densely packed beaded body. And you can see what the back side looks like here. I will now go ahead and cut around the edges of this. I kind of need to clip my curves the same way I would when I'm sewing. So I need to clip close to the areas where the shape changes, I suppose, or shifts. And of course, the more curved shape is, the more triangles you'll have to cut out of it. But I just try and leave myself a little bit of room, leave tabs around the edge of my piece, and then I will fold all those tabs to the underside here and secure them down into place with just loose whip stitching. Loose to start with, and then I'll pull them tight so everything keeps together in the end. And anywhere this is too hollow on the back, I will use those scraps of felt that I just cut off to fill in the back of this and kind of stuff it like a stuffed animal. It's not too dissimilar, although you wouldn't want to snuggle up with this guy because it's a little on the spiky side. This is as close as I've ever gotten to making a stuffed animal. And would this really count? I don't think so. This is the part where I start feeling a little bit like Frankenstein, though, and like I'm doing some sort of surgery on the back of my poor little bug, or in this case, arachnid, but same idea. And while making one of these does again take many hours, I feel like they're hours just so peacefully spent, just focusing on which sequin will fit where, And to me, any kind of embroidery always has this sort of extra layer of knowing that, generations and generations and generations of women have taken part in handicrafts and in fine little motor skill crafts like this, whether that's embroidery, weaving, knitting, needlepoint, tapestry, all that kind of thing. So I always do feel this like extra layer of connection to the past when I'm doing something like this, and it feels like such a very human thing to do for some reason. I guess in a way making something 3D out of nothing, out of just materials, and really giving into that like kind of flow state of creativity just really feels connective to a larger human experience. In many ways, it feels like the exact opposite experience of being over on Google trying to look something up and accidentally clicking on the AI search button, where instead of a moment of connectivity to humans of the past, you feel a small effervescent hit of disappointment in the humans of the present and, of course, the future. Somehow this is turning into a Christmas carol. Ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. Now I was going to try and use memory wire to make the legs for this because it's nice stiff wire, of course, but the only memory wire I have is bracelet memory wire, and I needed to make longer legs for this. It was just too coiled, so I ended up using some thicker copper wire that I had sitting around here. It's a little too bendy for this purpose, but again, I'll just have to be delicate with my Christmas ornaments, which is usually the case anyhow, so So I just cut a length of that and started bending it into my front legs of my spider here to figure out exactly what I wanted. Again, this is probably too bendy, so it's easy enough to shape into what I would like. And I do like having sets of legs, whether I'm making a beetle and I need 6 legs, or a spider and I need 8. It's nice to have them connected like this. It helps with the stability of the whole thing in general. It just feels a little bit more stable to have things balanced. And I am just going to string beads onto these wires here, starting with the size 6 fire polish beads, threading on some of the cupped sequins from earlier in between those, again just to keep things from getting too heavy. I didn't want to use glass beads on the entire strand of these, so I did intersperse this with sequins as well, and I just strung things on so that I was decreasing in size of both beads and sequins as I reached the tip of the little foot of the spider here, I guess. And I did finish with a tiny teardrop shape fire polish bead here, and then I just turned the end of the wire to hold everything into place. Because stringing on sequins is not the most fun thing ever, trying to use them as beads, it is a little time consuming. And also finding seed beads, I was using size 11 seed beads here because I didn't have anything larger, and stringing on the seed beads onto the thick wire, only 1 out of 5 seed beads actually would go onto this wire, so I was having a real fun time with that. So each of these legs, set of legs here, probably took me at least half an hour to 40 minutes. It was almost like 20 minutes to bead each side of the leg. So it took a while. But once I have all 4 sets of legs constructed and ready to be assembled, I just position those on the back, on the messy felt of the back of it all, and just whip stitch and blanket stitch these down into place, just securing them as best I can while getting my thread stuck on the legs. That's the problem. As soon as you introduce the little leggies or little feelers or things when you're doing something like this, then you have a whole new set of problems because there's too much for your thread to get stuck on while you're just trying to stitch things into place. But once I have my legs secured on the back here, you can see how having 2 on one strand like this with a sort of center bar comes in handy. I will cut out a little bit of buckram, which is what the white material you see here is, just to add a little bit more stability to the back of this. I do this for the brooches as well. So I'll just cut a couple of patches of this to add a firm backing to my bug here. Of course, you could create 2 of the first bit. Like if you used the felt and you did both sides, then you could sandwich them together right now and have a fully, entirely 3D spider without having to have a front and back, if you see what I mean. But I wanted to put a little date on the back of this, so I didn't mind having the back be less embellished. The inside of the tree we'll never have to know. And again, I'm just securing this down with a blanket stitch. And once I have the buckram secured on, I will cut down another piece of felt to size just to cover up all the nastiness on the back here, cover up all my stitching. And I'm just again going to go around the edge of this. You can either whip this down or blanket stitch it into place. A lot of people use like a thin leather for this, but I always just use felt. I never feel the need to get another material involved when the felt is already sitting right here and is the exact right color match. And in fact, at this point, if you were tired of stitching, you could technically glue this, but I like to do this entire process with no glue involved. But once I get way too close to the end of my thread here, I will try and tie that off. I'm always cutting it real close. I needed to end, 3 stitches ago, but I'm trying to see if I can make it work. And here is my giant sparkling red spider. Because who doesn't need one of those on their Christmas tree, right? I'll just cut a probably, 12-inch strand of 1/8 inch wide satin ribbon here in a similar dark red shade. And I put a little silk label on the back of this. This is 2025. Best I could do on short notice. I'm just going to tack both of these things down to the back. If I ever did want to put this spider onto something else, either as a display or as a piece of costuming or something like that, it could look nice in an 18th century updo someday. You never know when you might need to pull one of these into a different service. I could remove this loop or just hide it out of the way if I wanted to use this for any other purpose other than decorating my Christmas tree. But with this loop attached, my spider friend is fully finished and ready to go and hang on my tree.
I hope you enjoyed seeing how this little guy came together today, and thank you as always for watching, and a huge additional thank you to my patrons for making my work and these videos possible. And if you want the full details on what else I've put together for my tree this year, I actually did a video over on Patreon covering some of the other ornaments I put together. And I want to wish you a happy holidays from here at TCH HQ. Of course, I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!